Hey, do me a quick favor before we start. Turn to the person next to you or someone around you and tell them the greatest Christmas gift you have ever received. Go. Now, do it. Anytime in your life. Best gift you've ever received.
Drum set.
All right, good.
I don't remember. It was a gift. It was the best gift I got.
Okay, we shared it. Anybody have to think pretty hard about this? Husbands, did any of you look over at your wife and say it was you? Well done, well done. I set you up on a tee for that one. Come on, guys. Score some serious points. What are some of them? Just curious. What are some of the best gifts you've ever received?
Drum set.
Drum set. Nice. All right, good. What's that? A card. A car. That's out of my price range. I'm like, a card? Yeah. Car. Excellent. That's really cool.
Porcelain doll.
A porcelain doll. All right, good. Any other good ones? What do we got? These are some really random gifts. What else? Even as a kid, anything? Anybody? Stretch Armstrong. You're dating yourself right now, just that you know. Yes? What? Alaskan cruise. Let's just close there. We're done. Man, I remember my favorite present of all time. Well, I was in about 7th or 8th grade, can't remember, middle school. I know that much. And my friends had different technology stuff, and this is when CDs were all the rage, right? So they had a 6-disc changer and all these stereo equipment, and we couldn't really afford any of that. And so I never expected to ever get any kind of CD player or anything like that. And Costco had a sale. So my parents went in and they got me a CD player boom box. You guys remember boom boxes? You just kind of carry it around like this, looking ridiculous. And it was a 1-disc thing that you popped up and put the disc in there. And they got me my first CD, the Bodyguard soundtrack with Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You. And I used to just play it on repeat, just cry. It was amazing. I'll never forget that gift. But every Christmas, as you get older and then you start having kids of your own, don't you feel that pressure to have to get that perfect gift for everybody in your life, right? The one that's going to be life-defining. And if finally you just give up and get them a gift card, but still the pressure and the weight of that expectation is there. Christmas is an incredible time and such an amazing season, but it's also pretty stressful for a whole lot of people. And I think a lot of that stress is self-inflicted. We put it on ourselves as we look around at everybody else that seems to kind of have it all together. And they've got it all figured out. They've got their Pinterest page, for crying out loud, with all of these different Christmas craft ideas. And some of you are walking around the church going, that's a really good idea. You can make snowflakes out of hangers. Who knew? And we put this weight on ourselves of trying to get the perfect gift, trying to take the perfect family picture to send out Christmas cards to everybody who is on your Facebook page anyway. I'm just letting that hang out there for a second. So you all know why you're not receiving Christmas cards from our family this year. We are on Facebook. Just check out the family pictures there. But we want to have our schedule with the Christmas family time and decorating the tree and putting everything up where it's supposed to go and then starting to watch our Christmas movies, starting with like Santa Claus or Elf and ending with White Christmas and Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye. Or is this just me? Nobody else? Okay. Die Hard? Yeah, okay. Die Hard. That's fine. Whatever. We have our holiday traditions. We have our Christmas season traditions. And every year we feel like we've got these expectations we need to live up to. And yet every year, in fact, the more years that go on as life continues to happen to us, that perfect Norman Rockwell Christmas experience becomes more and more difficult to achieve, doesn't it? And we go through trials and we go through difficult things and we even look at ourselves and our own life. And a lot of years we're not where we wanted to be at this point in life. And we're going through things we never wanted to experience. And we still feel very bad about who we are and what we've accomplished or haven't accomplished. And so we look at everybody else and all of those expectations just become an avalanche that crushes us, and we feel out of place. We feel like we don't belong. We feel like misfits. You know, this series we're so incredibly excited about, and you can tell we went a little overboard. I've never had an abominable snowman stare me down while I'm preaching. But we had a creative team come in and try to set up a little environment. And if you've seen that old claymation Rudolph movie, this makes sense to you. Otherwise, you come in and it's like, did Christmas and a baby shower, explode together? But the pink and the blues, it's intentional. You know, when you got this character, Rudolph, who's an outcast and doesn't fit in with all the other reindeer, so he goes to the island of Misfit Toys. And you've got Charlie in the box, and you've got whatever this guy is. And you've got all these characters and defective toys that were rejected and had no place, yet found a home on this island of Misfit Toys. And it's the Christmas season, but we transition from all of the reds and greens and golds into pinks and blues and colors that just don't fit with the theme of Christmas. And it's all a part of that island of Misfit Toys. And guys, if you're here today, and you are going through anything in your life, if you are experiencing anything or have at any point that's had you feel a little bit like a misfit, like you don't quite fit in and belong, maybe in this world, maybe at work, maybe in your own family, maybe at church, you need to understand this message right here. Misfit Toys, we're welcome here. Because Christmas is a season where we celebrate the ultimate misfit. The God who stepped into this world he created as a misfit, belonging nowhere, and died on a cross so that we could have our sin forgiven and have our relationship with God made right, and so that you and I could have a family to belong to, his family. And that's what Christmas is all about. We get distracted from that, but throughout this series, we're going to be looking at all these different people Jesus called to be a part of his story, this Christmas story, and how none of them fit in, and none of them belong, and yet God included them as a part of his family and story. Today, we're going to be in Mark chapter 3, so if you can turn there, we'll start reading in verse 13. This is not a part of the nativity or the Christmas story. I just felt like it was so important as we start this series off to really see the heart of this great misfit Jesus and how he is still calling each and every one of us here today to come to him, to belong with him as a part of his church, and specifically to look at what it is he looks for and why it is that he's calling us. And so I want to look at there's Mark chapter 3 when he first called the disciples to himself. If you have a Bible, you can read along. If not, I will have the verses up on the screens. You guys can follow along. Verse 13, this is after Jesus begins his earthly ministry, and we pick up here. It says, he went up on the mountain, and he called to him those whom he desired. And they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now we're going to stop here. When you look at Jesus calling his first disciples, his 12 disciples, we can glean a lot, and I pray every one of us leaves here today highly encouraged, because most of us in this room would fit very well in this group of 12 disciples. And we'll explain why in just a minute. The first thing we read is that Jesus went up on this mountain, and we read that he called to him those whom he desired. Did you guys catch that? Jesus called to himself those whom he desired. Why is this important? Because these are people nobody else would have desired. Nobody else would have called to follow them. These were a group of social rejects, misfits and ragtag bunch, man. They were the people that were uneducated, untrained. Nobody had any hope or aspirations for them. And those are the ones Jesus said, you, I want you. You guys come and follow me. I've read a lot of leadership books. Anybody read Maxwell and all these other leadership gurus that try to tell us how to lead well? You know, one of the common principles and themes that you read, if you read enough of these books, is that a good leader gathers around people to himself that are more intelligent and more capable, that are higher achievers, that are better performers, and you surround yourself with better people than you and bring them together as a team. That's what good leadership is. Clearly, Jesus never read John Maxwell. Because when you look at this group, nobody else had any hope for them or any purpose for them beyond just living their quaint little life and dying, nameless and anonymous in the world and in history. When you look at this list and go down the names, it's again something that should encourage every one of us. Simon was an impulsive hothead who was constantly sticking his foot in his mouth. Did I describe anybody here today? Don't look at the person next to you. That's not polite. James and John, called the sons of thunder, and most biblical scholars suggest the reason for this is because they were quick-tempered and harsh and critical. Not only that, we see that they were constantly competing for the title of the greatest disciple and wanted to be known as that because of their pride. Matthew was a dishonest tax collector who ripped people off for a living. Thomas was the cynical realist who doubted the power and resurrection of Christ. Simon the Zealot was a political revolutionary whose group was constantly causing trouble. And then we have Judas. Do I need to expand on him? The betrayer. Those Jesus is looking for, those we see him here calling to himself, are not those the rest of the world looks for. If you've ever felt like an outcast or a misfit in this world, that is a great start to understanding Christ's call on your life. Because we're not called to fit in and belong here and now. We have a different citizenship in heaven, right? We have a different family that we belong to. And yet so many of us write ourselves off because we still judge ourselves and others according to the criteria of this world. James, the disciple, wrote in James 2, verse 5, "Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to those who love him?" See, James says, guys, his standards for calling and choosing, for including in his family, they're not the same standards you and I would use. Let me give you a little example of this. I got this from my son. Any Rubiks Cube experts in the house today? Okay, all right. Well, this is going to be impressive for you all then. You can tell it's all twisted and turned and all mixed up. I am going to solve this Rubiks Cube for you today. And not only that, I am going to solve this Rubiks Cube in 10 seconds. And to make it a little bit more challenging, I'm going to do it behind my back. You guys ready? Are you impressed by this or not? Everybody's like, who cares? Seen it done all the time. Okay, I'm putting myself out here for this, all right? So I need you guys to count backwards from 10. You ready? Go.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes.
0.
No applause? Thank you. Thank you. Nailed it. I failed, right? In fact, my wife and daughter were up here going, what is he doing? He doesn't know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. I always peel the stickers off, and this one I can't do it. It's part of the cube. I failed miserably. Now here's the question I have for you guys. Does anyone seeing me fail at doing this, are you guys now ready to leave the church? Okay, I thought so, Jason. It was just a matter of time, man. You're free to get out of here whenever you need to stay. Of course not, right? No one's here. Can you imagine explaining that to your friends and family? Those of you who have made Impact Church home, and you say, oh yeah, we're looking for a new church. What happened? Was there sin? Was there a failure? Yes, there was failure. Our pastor can't solve a Rubik's Cube in under 10 seconds behind his back. This is clearly not the church for us. That's ridiculous, right? We would never do that because the criteria we look for in church leadership has nothing to do with solving a Rubik's Cube. There are other criteria that are much more important. Now, some of you may be disappointed. That's okay. But that disappointment is way down here compared to what we are expecting from church leadership, right? Guys, what we expect from others, from ourselves, who we expect ourselves to be and others to be, the standards we hold ourselves and others to, so often are not only different, they are the antithesis. They are the opposite of the standards that God has and that he looks for. Jesus calls those that the rest of the world would not want to call. He's not looking for the most attractive, the most accomplished. He's not looking for the most capable or talented or popular or successful or athletic or intelligent. This is good news, right? Even in church, we fall into this trap. We esteem people that have certain gifts or abilities over others that don't. And anything that's happening up front, we go, oh, we need to all aspire to be that. No, we don't. We need to aspire to be exactly the best version of who Christ has made us to be. But we think, okay, if they're preaching and they're leading worship, then those are the godliest people. Those are the ones we need to emulate and become like. But Jesus is calling every one of us exactly where we are. We can't fall into this status trap of the rest of the world. If we don't have these characteristics, if at any point in our life we haven't felt attractive enough, we haven't felt popular enough or intelligent enough, we haven't accomplished enough or all that we want to accomplish in life, the danger of this is we write ourselves off, don't we? And so every sermon we hear, every Bible verse we read about God using people and changing the world and doing the impossible and forgiving us, we say, well, that's good for them, but it doesn't apply to me. And even if we think it might, and we'd say that in our heart, in our mind, we truly believe it's not for us. Yeah, God can forgive sin, but you don't understand what I've done. You don't understand how badly I've messed up. And I don't deserve to belong anywhere, because if anyone knew what I've done, they knew my past and my story, they'd want nothing to do with me. And so we keep just faking it till we try to make it, right? We keep just putting on that mask and trying to fit in, never opening ourselves up to anybody else because we're terrified what the response is going to be. What does Jesus look for? 1 Corinthians chapter 1, the Apostle Paul gives us a little insight into this. He writes this, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God." Paul says Jesus is looking for weak fools and foolish weaklings. Sign me up. Anybody in with me? Man, that is the criteria that Christ calls. He's looking for those in our brokenness who have finally come to a realization we are not everything that we think we are. We are not all that we aspire to be and yet never can become. We just get better at pretending to be that. And some of us have achieved more. Some of us have gotten more of our lives together. But that does not mean we have everything together. All of us have brokenness. And all of us come to this place today from a same position of dependence upon Christ for anything that is good in us. Guys, this is revolutionary and should be for some of us in here today. I spent so much of my life trying to prove to everybody who they thought I was that it was accurate. I wanted to prove them all right. Okay, so I need to be the leader in this and do that and be involved here, and I need to be this perfect Christian kid because my dad's in ministry and everybody expects that of me, and so I need to perform and be the best at everything. And I spent my life balancing on this pedestal that got shakier and shakier the longer I lived. And it ended up like a split life for me in so many ways, where I have this life here and my weakness, sin, and brokenness, and then I have this life here that was the public Christian persona. Anybody experienced that before? Man, you forget who you are. You don't know who you are anymore. And when you take away the position of leadership and pastor and ministry and everything else, you don't know who you are just as a child of God. And it's a lonely place to be, constantly trying to perform. The freeing moment came when I truly understood that it's not all of the good things in me that Jesus is looking for and calling me because of. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's me finally crashing off of my pedestal that I've been spending my life balancing on, realizing that as I'm doing this, I am blocking everybody else's view of the cross. And finally coming crashing down, broken, bloodied, and just completely at the end of myself, to realize what this whole thing is about. That I've got nothing to offer but an invitation to others to join me at the foot of the cross. And to sit there and bask in the grace and love of our Savior, who gives favor to us who do not deserve it, who could not deserve it, and will never deserve it. And that is the goodness of God. Are you still trying to be this version of a Christian or yourself you feel that you need to be? Guys, it is humbling to admit our weakness and foolishness. It is humbling to admit our own inadequacy and insufficiency, that we don't have what it takes. Man, our culture celebrates achievement, right? It celebrates. No matter how unhealthy we are in achieving, they don't care. Our culture, as long as we accomplish stuff, we have a place to belong. Now, granted, as soon as we stop accomplishing those things, they want nothing to do with us anymore. Because it's not about us, it's about the product, right? But see, that's not the heart of God. God's heart is to find those who are in a place of humility and brokenness, who recognize all that we're not. But it's not easy to do. I remember years ago, driving on this wide open road called the 91 freeway. And of course, was stuck in traffic for hours, just gridlock, and couldn't move, couldn't go anywhere. I was running late trying to get to Orange County. And so I came up to the 241. You guys know the toll road that goes up there and has all these other roads that connect into Orange County? And so I didn't have the fast track, transponder thing. I couldn't afford that. So I'm like, you know what? I've got a little bit of cash in my little coin bin here. I'm just going to, hopefully I'll have enough. We should be good. And so I take the 241. And this is when they still allowed you to pay cash. They had one booth in particular that was a cash booth. And so I pull up to this thing and I'm digging through, getting all the money out. And I'm going, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to have enough here. And I get every last penny. I'm holding it. I count it all out. I get up to the booth. I was 25 cents short. 25 cents. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. So I come up and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm 25 cents short. Can I just give you this? Is that okay? Oh, I'm so sorry. We need the full amount. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And I'm looking behind me and there's cars behind me. So I made the most humbling decision in that moment. And I put the car in park and I got out of my car and I walked to the Mercedes directly behind me. Thinking this guy's gotta have some change. He's probably got hundreds, right? So I kind of tap on the window thinking they're probably gonna worry for their life, but the window slowly comes down. And there was a very well-dressed African-American brother. And he is blinged out with jewelry everywhere. And he takes his shades, his aviator glasses, and he pulls them down. And he says, "Can I help you?" I certainly hope so. I need 25 cents. Do you have 25 cents to pay the toll? I'm 25 cents short, man. I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing. He started laughing uncontrollably. And then I find out he's talking with somebody, one of his buddies, on his Bluetooth in the car. And I hear him say, turns around and says, hey, one second, man. I got a white boy here who needs a quarter. And so he digs through, he finds a quarter, he gives it to me, laughing the whole time. I'm like, thank you very much. Man, Man, it is humiliating at times, isn't it? To admit our insufficiency. To actually acknowledge before God, let alone anybody else, that we don't have what it takes to be who we need to be. But guys, until we come to a place willing to humble ourselves before God, we will never go anywhere. We will remain stuck at that place of our inadequacy, of our brokenness. No matter how much of everybody else thinks of us, we'll know who we are. And we'll never be able to move forward. Isaiah chapter 66, God speaks through the prophet. But this is the one to whom I will look. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. 1 Peter 5, verse 5, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with what? Humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Guys, if you have reached a point in your spiritual life and journey where you have finally got it figured out, where you finally step back and go, all right, I am the best Christian ever. I don't know why I struggled so long. Man, I am doing all of the right things. I've got this thing dialed. Look at all of these peons over here. Look at all of these chumps still struggling with this stuff. I mean, they need to look at me because I'm the best and I'm moral and I'm good and righteous. If I'm standing next to you, I will take a large step to my right. Understanding that when we have that mindset and way of thinking, when we feel we have arrived in our faith in that way and are no longer utterly dependent upon the grace of God for every part of us that is good, we place ourselves in direct opposition to the living God. You hear this? God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. To those who recognize we are misfits and the only thing Christian in me is Christ and his righteousness. Jesus called a group that he desired, that nobody else would have desired. But then we see they responded, right? It says he called them to himself and they came to him. This is so key because if we acknowledge our insufficiency, if we acknowledge our brokenness, our sin, and everything that we're not, that's a good starting point. But guys, that's not everything. There needs to be a response to choose to answer the call just like these disciples did. If the disciples did not go up that mountain and go to Christ, they would have remained at the foot of the mountain in their sin and inadequacy, in their foolishness and weakness. Nothing would have changed. It's not our foolishness and weakness that is powerful. It's our foolishness and weakness that opens us to the opportunity for God's power in our lives. But we have to choose to respond to his call. We have to leave everything else behind, just like they did. All of the life we wanted for ourselves and begin pursuing the life that Christ has for us. Paul did just this. In 2 Corinthians, he wrote these words, verse 9. But Jesus said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, it's his power that's made perfect in our weakness, not our own. Guys, this whole worldly mindset of if you just dig deep, look deep within yourself and you're going to find a hero that's been there all along. Mariah Carey lied in that song. The hero is not in you. You dig deep, all you're going to find is more of the same. All the stuff that you try to keep below the surface, you just shove deeper and deeper, and that's all that's there is our failure, our fears, and our faults. The good news is that the God who is everything loves using nothing to make something. He did it from the very beginning, creating this world upon which you and I live and dwell. And he did it, the Latin phrase is ex nihilo, out of nothing. In fact, we live in a world that is bound by physical laws, where you cannot create or bring something into existence, materially speaking, out of nothing. Everything comes from something else. Energy is transferred from one form to another. But see, God isn't bound by the laws of our physical world. The creator of this world spoke all of it into existence with its laws from nothing. And as long as you and I are willing to place ourselves in a position of nothingness, he can make something out of us and do what he wants to with our lives. The disciples were called by Christ, those that nobody else would have looked to. And then they responded as we are called to respond and answered that call. But the purpose for the call, we have to understand just like they did. And we see it here in verse 14. He appointed 12 so that they might be with him. And he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. Now, I used to go immediately to the preaching and casting out demons because that's cool. And those are the kinds of things that this world appreciates, man. When someone can stand up there and give this eloquent sermon and thunder away and preach, people like that. And casting out demons, I mean, that's kind of crazy, but there's some power and authority there when you see someone delivered spiritually in a moment. That's good stuff. But see, before Jesus sent them out, he called them to himself and laid a foundation. Before he sent them to do those things, we read that he called them so that they might be with him. Did you catch that? Before he sent them to do anything, he called them to be with him. We don't read that he called them so that they might do these things for him. And it makes sense here, but it doesn't make sense here. For so many of us still caught up in this performance mentality when it comes to our Christian faith. Still trying to prove to Jesus he didn't make a mistake in forgiving your sin. Trying to prove to him that you are worthy of his love and of his favor. Guys, that's not how grace works. It is your unworthiness that qualifies you for his undeserved favor. Once we feel that we deserve it, it's no longer undeserved, it's no longer grace. Now it's just a paycheck. The heart of Christ is not that we would do all of these things for him. That's not why he is calling you. That's not what this is about. And if you are new to the faith, this is something that you must grab hold of, because people and situations are going to pull you away from the simple truth, this truth of the gospel of grace. That God's favor is not received by someone because of how well we do for Jesus. That grace is, we can't do anything, it's all him. And every change in our life and everything that transforms in us, he accomplishes. It's his spirit, not us. And so we need to focus on the one most important thing, and that is knowing him more. Being with Christ. In Acts, the book of Acts, you see the religious leaders looking at the spirit-empowered disciples. And it says that they recognized that they were uneducated and untrained, right? Misfits. It says, but they also knew that they had been with Jesus. That was the only distinguishing characteristic about the early church and about these early church disciples. And we as a church need to recapture so much of this. And this isn't easy for those of us who thrive and live off of our to-do lists. And man, it's long during Christmas time, isn't it? Some of you right now have been thinking about wandering off in your mind all the stuff you've got to do when you get home. All the different decorations you still need to put up, the gifts you need to buy, the things your kids need when they go back to school for the next few weeks. And your mind's already going there, and it's all the things that we need to do. And we carry that into our faith, and we carry that into our relationship with God. And we miss the point entirely. Now, Jesus said in Matthew 22, when someone came and asked him, what is the greatest commandment? in all of the law and prophets, in all of the Old Testament scripture. 793 commandments that was then beefed up by the religious leaders with thousands more rules and regulations. And they come to Christ, ask him to sort through all of that and give this response. What is the greatest commandment? And Jesus never hesitates. He says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, and all of your strength. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these two commandments depend all of the law and all of the prophets. The picture he gives there, this word for depends, it is a word for hinges. It hinges upon. You get this? So think about your house. You come home and you've got that front door. Those things are tall, metal, and heavy, trying to keep out the big bad wolf, yeah? And so you come up to this door. Now imagine a hingeless front door where every time you enter or exit, you have to take this thing and carry it and set it to the side, and you get out and everybody else comes out and then put it back in there. How burdensome, how heavy, how weighty would that be? But God bless the inventor of the hinge who said, I got an idea. And with two little pieces of metal that attach to the wall and the door, or the door frame and the door, now you and I just have to go click, swing that bad boy open. And we can come and go as we please. And the burden of this door, the weight of this door is now borne by the hinges. These hinges, loving God, loving others. Guys, this is what it's about. And everything else God calls us to do is dependent upon these two things. It's all about your relationship with Christ. And my kids will, at different times in my life, write me little notes, and I always love it. I'm a words of affirmation guy, so whenever they write notes, I'm like, oh, and I save them. I've got like a kid box. I don't put the actual children in there, just their notes and paintings and stuff. And I came across one of them. I was looking through it just not long ago, and I pulled one out and found one that my son, Andy, who was 6 years old at the time, wrote me a little note when I had been a little bit sick and I wasn't feeling well. And so I got this note. It's really, really cute. It says, Dad, I hope you feel better tomorrow, and if you do, hip, hip, hooray. I love you. Many exclamation points. Heart, love Andy, black heart. Not sure what that's about, but I got this note. And of course, because it meant so much, I did what any loving parent would do. I grabbed the red marker and made all the corrections for him. You can see some of these corrections, right? So, first of all, better has two T's, son. This is ridiculous. You don't feel beater, you feel better, right? And it's not tomorrow, it's tomorrow with a W, not a Y. And if you do, hip, hip, hooray should be hyphenated, okay? Hyphenated with a period to end that sentence. I love you, thank you, that's great. You don't start the next line with all these exclamation points. You end the sentence with it, you only need one, that's fine. And after love and before Andy, you need a comma. And I wrote all of it down, gave it back to him and said, make these changes and then bring it back to me and maybe I'll receive it. Of course I didn't do that. You're like, okay, it wasn't the Rubiks Cube, but now we are ready to leave the church. Of course I didn't respond that way. I'd be the worst dad ever, right? You don't get a note like this with all of its grammatical errors and start tearing it apart with a red pen, making all the changes that need to be made. Yeah, guys, some of us are terrified to bring anything of ourselves to the Lord because we see it contaminated with our sin and our fear, with all of our weakness and doubts, our insecurities, and we don't want to bring any of that because what can God do with that? I mean, look at me. I'm nothing. I'm not in anything that I should be like everybody else seems to be. And so we don't bring any of ourselves to him, afraid he's going to grab out his red marker, cosmic marker, and start chalking everything up and making the corrections and just beating us down and beating us down and beating us down. Red is the color of his blood that was given and spilled freely, so that every fault and every sin and every weakness and every fear could be forgiven and done away with once and for all. So that when he calls us to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and says that's what it's about, it is written in red, which means it cannot be changed. To hear the heart of Jesus, not as your heavenly school instructor, but your heavenly Father who is calling you to himself, just as you are. No matter what you have done or how you feel about who you are in this moment, it does not change the call of Christ on your life. In all of your weakness and sin and failure, in all of your foolishness and idiocy, and all of the moments you have been an utter and complete moron, it's in those moments he stands, arms open, calling you, saying, come to me. Let me change everything you know needs changing. Let me do it. Let my spirit in you accomplish all that you've been trying to accomplish and have yet been unable to, and you never will be able to. Let me do it. Take my burden upon you because it is light. Those hinges are firmly in place. Just be with me. Know my heart for you. Know who I am to you. I'll close with this. There was a pastor who shared a story of, and always stuck with me, of a college group he was a part of. And there was a college minister, and there were 100, 200 kids that were part of this group. And there was somebody trying to, lead them and minister to them, and I'm sure very well-intentioned. But he shared a story how this minister was doing a sermon on why it's important to remain pure in our dating relationships and why we needed to make sure and do things God's way. Otherwise, there are serious consequences. And he shared how he did this illustration thing at the beginning. And he handed this beautiful long stem red rose to this person in the front row. And he said, do me a favor, I'm going to just be talking here. And as I'm talking, I want you to take this rose and just kind of, feel it, examine it, smell it, just really get a good feel for this rose and make sure you really can grasp everything about it. And then hand it to the next person, let them do the same thing. Okay, so they start doing that and they're pulling the petals down, smelling everything, and you're really kind of bending it and feeling this rose and handing it to the next person who did the same thing. And this guy's up here talking about, God's plan and how we need to do everything the right way, God's way. And of course, true statements. But as these statements are taking place, the rose keeps getting passed row to row. And with every hand that handled it, the petals began to wilt and the leaves got kind of beat up and started falling off and the petals started coming apart. And the kids would try to grab it and put it back together. It wasn't working. And so they just passed it on to the next person. And eventually the stem broke a little bit with one of the handoffs. It wasn't very gentle, probably between two college football players. And it just kept getting passed back and forth, row to row, until it reached the very end. And finally, when it reached the end, this teacher up here stopped and wanted to make his final point. And so he said, okay, the rose is in the back, good. And he walked to the back and he grabbed this rose and he walked back up to the front. He said, you guys remember what this used to be, right? And they all nodded their head. Remember how it was this beautiful long stem red rose, no flaws, just perfect condition, right? Yeah. And he held it up with all of his brokenness and this shabby rose that he now held in his hand because it had been handled by so many. And to prove his point, he said, who would want this now? See, guys, that's the question that many of us are haunted by, isn't it? Who would want me now? With all that I've done and how many times I've proven myself to be less than anything Jesus wants me to be. Man, there's got to be a limit. I know they say grace has no limits and his love knows no bounds, but certainly I found him. And I've pushed up against him and I've crossed over him. There's no way he's not done with me. Who would want me now? And what I loved about this story is this pastor shared how from the back of the room, the Spirit of God just started stirring in his heart and he couldn't take it. He stood up in the back of the room and he said, Jesus does. Jesus wants the rose. And he wants every one of us in here. He's calling you to himself today. Stop fighting against him. because of misunderstandings you've had that this world and even church at times has given you about who you need to be. You let him make you who he wants you to be. You come to him to be with him and only to be with him so that he can change you how he wants to.